Okay, hi, I'm Chris Brandon from Switch Weekly, and today we're going to run through the survey results for the State of Switch Survey 2020, see what that means, see what people said, see what people think about Nintendo's system after 3 years on the market. I've been doing this survey for 3 years now, and this year over 10,000 people took part, so let's dive into the results. All right, so before I get into the detail, I just want to give you a quick bit of background as to why I've been doing this survey for the past 3 years. Initially, I started it in 2018, and it was just a way really to kind of gauge how people felt about this then new console after a year on the market. It was a novel concept, and it kind of still is, I guess, in that, there was a lot of buzz around this kind of hybrid machine that Nintendo just brought to market, marrying both handheld gaming and TV home console play. So I wanted to get a feel for that, and I've been doing that ever since, year on year. And it's kind of been interesting, and it kind of tells a story of how the perception of Nintendo has changed from the Wii U days, and there's a lot more confidence around the brand and things like that, really. So yeah, this year is no different. 10,000 of you took part. Thank you to those who did. This year, obviously, we've got new things to ask around like the Switch Lite, Joy-Con Drift, etc. So yeah, well, let's jump in. All right, so first up is actually a set of questions for people who don't own a Switch yet. I start the survey this way just to kind of split the kind of survey in half of those who have one and those who don't. The reason I asked about people who don't own a Switch yet is just to kind of see what it is Nintendo isn't doing that hasn't captured them, So although this is a survey designed for those who own the Switch, I start off by asking, do you own one? If not, why? And what is it that's holding you back?
Of all of those responding, around 3% of individuals said they do not currently own a Switch. Of those without a Switch, 85% indicated that they do intend to buy or receive a Switch at some point in the future. This is no surprise and is an expected response from such an inquiring audience. These are people that have an interest in the Nintendo Switch, they just haven't had a chance to get one yet. As has always been the case with this survey, price remains the main obstacle for why folks do not yet own a Nintendo Switch. Around $230 seems to be the price that most people would be comfortable paying for the regular Switch. Interestingly, this average has gone up, but in last year's survey in 2019, the average acceptable price was around $200. I wouldn't read too much into that, but it's interesting nonetheless. I also asked what price the Switch holdouts would happily pay for a Nintendo Switch Lite. The average response here was around $140. So, no matter whether it's a regular Switch or a Switch Lite, those that are price sensitive think that Nintendo's console is priced around $60 to $70 too high. Another common response here as to why people haven't yet got a Switch included waiting for a hardware refresh. That long-rumoured Pro model, I'd imagine. Personal timing reasons were also noted, and as was waiting for a specific game. Now, of course, Animal Crossing is now out, but those that answered the survey said that that was one game that they were definitely waiting for before they get a Switch. A fair few responses also said that they were waiting for the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel before they picked up a Switch. Now, this is kind of interesting to me. I'd say just go and buy a Switch anyway and play the first one before jumping into the next one.
All right, so as you might expect, the majority of those answering this survey do actually own a Nintendo Switch. Of the 10,000-ish plus, around 9,800 of those do actually own one, so the majority of those responding. So next, I just kind of wanted to know what they think about it, where they bought it, which one they own, whether they own any special editions, what they think about the new Switch Lite, things like that. So that's what these next set of questions are all about.
So, as I just mentioned, this year is a little bit different as the Nintendo Switch Lite has been introduced in the last 12 months. So, I started this set of questions by asking which models folks actually own. As you'd expect, the majority of survey respondents, around 94%, own the regular Nintendo Switch. Only 2% of those answering own just the Nintendo Switch Lite. This low number is no surprise considering this additional model has only been on the market for less than a year. Interestingly, 4% of respondents own both a Nintendo Switch and a Switch Lite. Now, the fact that dual ownership is higher here is probably just down to the enthusiast crowd answering this survey and is not reflective of the market at large. So I asked those with a Nintendo Switch Lite what it was about this new model that appealed to them. Common reasons include things as it being cheaper, having a better battery life, and of course the portable form factor. Another thing that came up quite a bit was that it was more suitable, i.e. comfortable, for younger players. A fair few people mentioned that they have a Switch Lite purely because they didn't actually own a television. So back to those people who own both a regular Switch and a Lite. I wanted to know why that was the case, and the answers here might not surprise you, but here's what they said. Quite a few people said that they're actually collectors, that they collect a lot of Nintendo stuff, so they wanted to have one of each. Another common answer was becoming a multiple Switch household, whether that's for like local co-op or buying it for a child, or having it for the pure convenience of having your Switch permanently docked at the TV and the Lite ready to go for any portable play. A couple of people detailed how their original Switch model is now solely docked for like exercise, like Ring Fit Adventure and stuff, and they take the Lite for play duties for everything else. So beyond knowing about the switch between regular and Lite, I also ask about what color variations people have. For the first time in the 3 years I've been running this survey, the actual original Neon Joy-Con variant came out as the most popular choice. In the years prior, much to my surprise, the grey one always came out as the most popular. Now, I actually regret getting the grey one, as I think on reflection, the neon one is so much cooler, so it's no surprise to finally see that one come out on top. People have realised neon's the one to go for, I guess. From what I can gather, Nintendo have actually never broken down sales number by colour, so this is always an interesting question to see which options folks prefer. Around 43% of people here said that they own the Neon Joy-Con variant of the original Switch, with 40% having the grey version. As for the Switch Lite, turquoise is the most popular colour, with grey and then yellow being the least popular. Now, this is a new question that I asked this year, but I wanted to know whether respondents had ever experienced any form of stock shortages when trying to buy anything Switch related, be that hardware or software. I put forward this question as I'd heard anecdotally that a lot of folks were having trouble getting a Switch around the holidays, and more recently a copy of Ring Fit Adventure, which I know during this lockdown period has been crazy popular and really hard to come by. Around 40% of those said that they had come up against some sort of stock shortages. Now, this isn't the majority, but it does exhibit that Nintendo have had some issues in meeting demand here, whether that be for operational reasons, seasonal demands, or just supply issues beyond their control. I should have really expanded on this question with a follow-up asking what specific items folks were struggling to obtain, but it's interesting to see that, there is an issue here in terms of stock, supply, demand, etc.
Next up was a set of questions all about games. Now, obviously, that's the most important thing, isn't it, with any platform? And I just kind of asked things like how many games people own, how many first-party games they own, what games they want to see coming to the platform, and things like that. So let's jump into that.
So, on average, Switch owners have around 24 games. This is up 50% on last year, as the 2019 average answer was just 16. This includes both physical and digital games, of course, but it's interesting to see it jump so much. In 2018, the average answer was just 10 games. So year on year, it really is going up dramatically. As the survey attracts an enthusiast crowd, a fair few collectors do push up these averages. A number of responses were well over 200 games owned. As such, I looked into the median, and the median for this question is 18 games owned. In terms of what games folks actually own, I always like to get a good idea of which Nintendo published games people have picked up. A massive 85% said they own The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This attach rate is up on last year by around 5%. Over 70% of those responding said they own Mario Odyssey, Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The above four titles really seem to be the system seller must-owns here. Big 2019 titles such as Super Mario Maker 2, Fire Emblem Three Houses, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and Luigi's Mansion 3 all sat between 30 to 40% ownership. No surprises here, but Pokemon Sword seems to be more popular than Pokemon Shield. Sword came in at around 30% ownership, with Shield coming in at around 25%. Some 20% of survey respondents own Astral Chain, 15% said they had Ring Fit Adventure, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 was just shy of 10% attach rate, and just 3% of respondents picked up Daemon X Machina. So as I just mentioned, over 70% of respondents noted that they own Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So I wanted to ask them, what one character would they like to see join the Smash Bros. Roster as a future DLC character? Now, of course, all of these decisions are already made and tied up, so this was very much just a just for fun type question. So in terms of what characters people want to see come to Smash, these were the top 6 answers given. Waluigi came out on top, followed by Sora from Kingdom Hearts, Halo's Master Chief, Minecraft Steve, Doom Guy, and Crash Bandicoot. Other popular Smash requests include Akira Howard from Astral Chain, Cooking Mama, which kind of surprised me, the Hornet from Hollow Knight, a Monster Hunter rep of some sort, and Elmer from Xenoblade. Okay, back to questions about games. I wanted to know what was the one game that people have spent the most time playing on their Switch. This is something you can check in your Switch user bio, and as the Switch gets older, it's an increasingly interesting question to ask because the Switch's library is now so diverse with over 3,000 games on the platform. As you might expect though, there are a lot of common replies. The number one game that people spend the most time playing on their Switch is, to no surprise, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. In at number 2 was Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Number 3 was actually a new entry, in that Fire Emblem Three Houses has taken up a lot of people's playtime. Splatoon 2 came in at number 4, and a third-party game, Stardew Valley, was at number 5. It's kind of staggering to me that Breath of the Wild has such staying power. It has sat at the top of this playtime question every year. Other games that proved popular here include Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the latest Pokemon games, Dragon Quest XI, The Binding of Isaac, Hollow Knight, Super Mario Odyssey, Minecraft, Fortnite, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Next up, I wanted to ask how people feel about Nintendo porting older titles to the Switch. When the Switch first came out, there seemed to be a bit of a negative vibe around porting Wii U titles over to the Switch, but that seems to have changed over time. In fact, now 87% of those who responded said they'd be happy to see more ports come to the system. Now, ports are one thing, but I also wanted to ask about Nintendo's broader IP. They have such a rich kind of collection of properties that they could bring to the Switch, and certain ones that they haven't. I'm looking at you, WarioWare or F-Zero, you know. So I asked people, if they could only pick one, and being a bit mean here, what should Nintendo's focus be? Should they focus on creating new franchises, like Splatoon say, or concentrate on returning old series such as F-Zero to the platform? Now, thankfully, the split was 60-40 in favour of creating brand new games, which I think is always a good thing, you know, not to rely too heavily on old franchises. But it's good to see that it's only 60-40, you know, so yes, bring us new games, but we want to see 40% of the time you bringing us back the classics, you know? So Nintendo, take note, bring back some of the classics. Next up, I wanted to ask whether people are actually taking advantage of the fact that the Nintendo Switch is region-free. I asked if respondents had played any games from a country other than their own, you know, be that with physical copies or with a game via the eShop. Around 33% of those said yes, they had played an imported game, with the main reason being due to a game's availability, say not available in your country, for example. Cost was also a driving factor, but plenty of other reasons were shared, including like moving to another country, buying a game when you're on holiday, and living in a country where the eShop or retail support is limited, or non-existent, you know? Now, although the majority of Switch owners do not actually take advantage of the region-free nature of the Switch, a sizable number of owners do, and the reasons for doing so are really well-founded. So this is a welcome feature for the Switch, and I'd really like to see it stick around in any future hardware that Nintendo releases. So like I said earlier, people own around 20 games on their Switch. I wanted to know what percentage of their library is digital. And with each passing year, I expect this digital number to shoot up, you know? But much to my surprise, the results here have been fairly consistent for the past 3 years, at around 50-50. In 2018, it was just shy of 50% digital ownership. In 2019, 52% was digital. For 2020, that figure stands at 55% digital games owned. So yes, it's creeping up, but by no means is the rise a dramatic one. I think half the reason why I always expect digital ownership to be way higher is based on my own experience. The Switch has such a vast digital library, and the console is now home to way over 3,000 games, whereas last year it was like 1,700 or something like that. I'd say my Switch library personally is probably around 80-20 in favour of digital titles. I have very few physical games. But again, like I mentioned, this is an enthusiast crowd that might be answering this, so a fair few collectors may kind of skew the data in one direction here. But yeah, let me know in the comments how many games that you have are digital.
All right, so there's a few questions in this section that I didn't particularly nail in how I asked it, and it kind of bases around dollar amount paid for a game versus the kind of level of enjoyment or how many hours you expect to get out of it, you know? This is a thing I've kind of seen a lot of chatter about in the last year or two, in terms of people saying, you know, all right, well, I've paid $20 for a game and it's only 2 hours long. I expect more from it. And whether that, you know, kind of holds any broad value in terms of what people think. So I asked these questions of like, oh, if you spent this long playing a game, do you expect to get this much kind of out of it and things like that? I didn't kind of get the questioning quite right. So it's a bit of frustration here, but here's what the data is anyway, all the same. But just to note that I'm not particularly happy with how I asked this question and whether it actually gives us of any kind of valuable data in the end of it.
Like I just said, I've included this and I wasn't entirely pleased with how I kind of asked the question, but all the same, here's what folks had to say. I asked how much time folks spend with a full price game, and the average answer here was around 50 hours. When it came to a game with a $20 to $30 value, the average playtime response was nearer to 30 hours. Finally, I asked how much time folks typically spend with a game priced $5 or less, and the average answer here was around 10 hours. Like I've said, I think the way in which I asked this question invited a response of a certain type and wasn't really open-ended enough. So I think if I was to ask this again, it would need work, but I wouldn't really read into this section too much.
Sticking with the theme of games, but kind of how you buy them, I guess, is the next set of questions, because it's all about the eShop. I wanted to know kind of buying habits on Nintendo's digital storefront and what people think about that store. I mean, personally, you know, there's a discoverability issue for me, at least, in terms of the eShop, in terms of, you know, I see 25 to 30 games a week coming onto the eShop, and once they do, everything gets pushed out of the way. So there's personal issues that I have there. But yeah, this next set of questions are kind of people's buying behavior on the eShop and what they think about it.
First up, I asked a question to see if there was any reluctance to match digital spending on the eShop to that of its physical equivalent, and to see if there was some sort of general frame of mind around digital games and their perceived value. I asked when they're buying a game on the eShop, what is the kind of maximum folks would be willing to pay? And most people seem prepared to pay whatever they would pay for a full price physical title of around $60. I thought there might be some kind of hesitancy here to matching the price of a physical product to that of a digital one, and although there's an element of truth to that in terms of what you can see here, by and large it seems compared to physical games, a good number of people are prepared to pay similar prices for their digital equivalent. Next, I asked a series of questions around behaviours when using the Switch's digital store, mainly around the eShop and the game's listings, 87% of respondents said that they read the game's text description in some form, kind of highlighting really how important it is to have a really good text description when selling your game. In terms of the screenshots, 57% said they will look at all of the screenshots that are there, with 38% saying they'll at least look at some of them. So having good screenshots is really important too. And again, having a trailer is really important. 74% of folks said they'll watch a trailer on the eShop whilst they're browsing. With all of that in mind, I asked how much a good eShop listing influences somebody's purchasing decision. And despite people saying that they look at all the images and always watch the video, the results here are fairly mixed, as you can see. However, not at all influential did come dead last, so I guess that does say something. I then asked some questions around sales on the eShop. I wanted to know just how compelling an eShop sale can be, and it's pretty decisive, as over 70% of respondents said they had bought a game on the eShop just because it was on sale. A good sale can flip someone over from skipping on a game to picking it up and giving it a go. Now, sometimes the eShop has sales which sees games heavily discounted, and I'm talking like crazy, silly discounts, These supermax sales can see some games reduced by up to 90%. And you can make of that what you will, they end up being like 10 cents to pick up and then they go to the top of the charts, but if their quality is another question, I asked survey respondents if they'd ever bought any of these heavily, deeply discounted titles, and around 60% said they had. Next, I asked if there is a sale, how many of these games would you actually look at, If there's loads of offers on, are you going through and browsing the whole lot to see if there's any hidden gems that you might want to grab or not, or if you're just kind of glancing at it? So when I asked when an eShop sale is taking place, do you typically browse some or all of the games discounted? Around 62% said they look at some of them, 27% said they look at everything, and 10% said I tend not to browse. I guess those people know what they want and they head onto the eShop with an intention, Next, I asked how likely respondents were to download a game demo from the eShop, and the results were somewhat split. As you can see, more people are likely than not to grab a demo, but I did find it kind of interesting how it's not inherently a surefire way to get folks to take an interest in a game. Finally, on the eShop, I asked what people would do to improve it. Common responses here included wanting Nintendo to implement or bring back a user review or rating system. They had one for like a week, a year or two ago, and then they took it away and it's never seen the light of day since, so bring that back please. Another thing was wanting to see performance tweaks. They want it to be faster. The eShop has lag, and that came up a lot in terms of people just saying that it's slow, So improvements to performance was a big feature request here. Another thing was improved wishlist features, the ability to gift a game to somebody, enhanced search features, and the option to add filters when you are searching, A popular comment here was wanting a way to filter out mobile games, but that would be a tricky one to put into practice, I'd imagine. Another thing people want to see in the eShop is a way to handle refunds. Of course, one thing people definitely want to see on the eShop, but again might hinder performance, is the addition of music. Just imagine. From reviewing all of the comments left about the Switch's digital store in the survey, one thing is pretty clear to me. The way in which the eShop works today is no longer best serving the user. As I've mentioned a few times, with a library in excess of 3,000 titles, and an average of around 20 to 30 new games being added every week, it's clear that the eShop now needs a rethink. Filters and search will go some way to fix this, but at a certain point, that may feel like a band-aid over a bigger problem. At this point, the eShop needs a complete redesign, one that better highlights what's on offer, and avoids games being lost from the page one into the obscurity of the Switch's vast library so quick. A new design that's fast is what we want to see.
Okay, so this next round of questions explore things like playstyles, controller preferences, what accessories people have, things like that.
Generally, Switch owners will spend an average of around 7 hours a week playing/using their console. Playing on the TV remains the most popular playstyle, but it's close, as handheld play is the preference of around 48% of players. Only 2% of folks spend most of their time playing in tabletop mode. The average Switch owner has around 3 controllers. This matches the data from 2019. For over 60% of respondents, the Pro Controller is the input device of choice. Around 85% of those responding have a microSD card in their Switch, and of those using a memory card, the 128GB capacity is the clear favourite. Only 25% of Switch owners use a portable battery charger with their console. For most, the Switch is a solo affair. When I asked how many people use a Switch, the average answer was 1.
Okay, next up is all about Nintendo Switch's online service and what people think of that and how many people have signed up for it and those sort of details and what features they use and what features they appreciate.
So out of all of those responding, over 80% indicated that they were currently a paying member for the Nintendo Switch online service. This is up around 10% on 2019. Most folks, around 65%, are on the annual plan. This makes sense as it's the cheapest option long term. A good number of respondents indicate that they're in a family membership. This is a shared plan that works out cheaper still if you can form a group. Of those in a family plan, only 30% were made up of strictly family members. So for most people, it's a mix of friends, families, folks from the internet, and it seems to be the more common approach to how people use these memberships, these family plans, Of course, the reason people are paid up members? To play online. Over 83% of people listed this as the key reason for signing up. Access to classic games, such as the NES and SNES apps, came in second, with 49% of respondents listing this as the reason that they joined up for the Nintendo Switch online service. Cloud saves was another driving factor, with around 42% of those responding noting that that was a motivator for signing up. Of course, members of the Switch Online service also get access to the Nintendo Switch Online app. This is meant to be used for voice chat in certain titles, but it's clear that not many folks like it, and who can blame them? Only 3% of people said that they use it. 97% do not actively use this app at all, preferring instead to use something like Discord. As I've just mentioned, access to classic games seems to be quite the draw for people here. So I asked Switch Online members whether they had played any of the retro games available. Around 90% indicated that they had. However, despite such a large number saying that they've given the NES and SNES games a try, they don't seem to have stuck with them for very long, as the average playtime for these older titles falls between 0 to 5 hours for most, as you can see. Of all the retro games made available, it seems the more recent SNES editions have been more warmly welcomed than those from the initial NES batch. When I asked what single retro game folks have enjoyed playing the most as part of their membership, titles such as Super Mario World, F-Zero, Super Metroid, and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past saw far more responses than anything else. I also asked what games people want to see added to these retro collections. People want classics such as Earthbound, Donkey Kong Country, Battletoads, Castlevania, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy, to name just a few. A handful of people want to see Duck Hunt added to the service, but I'm unsure how that could work with modern TVs, unless Nintendo upgraded it to use the IR blaster or something in the right Joy-Con. Just over 60% of Nintendo Switch Online members said they think the service provides good value for money. Of course, this leaves plenty of room for improvement, but it's heading in the right direction of travel at least. Common areas that people want Nintendo to focus on in order to improve their online service include adding a native messaging system, which would be nice, built into the system, implementing party chat, and introducing a Nintendo 64 library of classic games to play. Yes, please. I'm a paying member and generally agree with the sentiment here, which seems to be, it's fine.
Alright, so one of the big stories with the Switch has of course been Joy-Con drift. So this next set of questions kind of focuses on the console's durability, improvements people would like to see in it, and changes they expect from Nintendo going forward.
So like I just said, a big area of focus in this year's survey was Joy-Con drift. Of course, this isn't a new problem, but it seemed to have gotten particularly pronounced during 2019. In fact, I myself suffered from it. As such, I led with a series of questions relating to this issue. More than half of those responding to the survey shared that they have had experienced some form of Joy-Con drift. 54% said they experienced drift versus the 45% who faced no issues. Of those who faced problems, around 20% sent their drifting Joy-Cons to Nintendo to repair. Thankfully, the majority of those sending them into Nintendo did receive a repair for free. Putting aside drift issues, I asked if folks had experienced any other form of hardware-related problems, and around 20% of people said they had. The most common was yet another issue with the Joy-Con, that they disconnect. Now this is maybe some sort of Bluetooth issue, but it seems controllers disconnecting is a fairly common issue for folks. Another thing was buttons sticking on the Joy-Con as well. It seems there's plenty of issues with these little controllers that are giving people headaches, Other things that people picked up on in terms of hardware issues was around battery life, the kickstand breaking, and small cracks in the plastic body. which is something we've heard about in years prior as well. Now, these issues aren't particularly widespread, so I guess they could be attributed to general wear and tear / usage, but it's interesting to highlight nonetheless. So, with all of that in mind, I asked what was the one single hardware improvement that folks want to see. Now, of course, as you can see here, there's plenty of options, but I said to folks, just pick one. And it's no surprise that people want the drift sorted. Bluetooth support came in second, and yep, I can totally get that. That would be so nice. As an AirPods Pro user, having my AirPods in and using them with a Switch would be a delight. And improved battery life were also up there. Beyond hardware, I asked about any software issues people had faced. Now, these don't seem to be too common, as only around 14% said they'd run up against any form of software issue. Typical responses here include games or the operating system crashing or freezing. A few mentioned Wi-Fi disconnecting, but this could also be classed as a hardware problem. When it comes to software improvements, folks still want themes on their Switch, and they want to see apps such as Netflix and Hulu on the system too. Built-in messaging and an achievement system also remain sought-after improvements. As you can see here, there's a mixed variety of responses for what people want to see improved or added to the Switch. Now, these next couple of questions are just kind of around like modding and things. I asked whether folks had changed the shell of their Joy-Con. You know, you can go for like a custom look and change the plastic shell that houses your Joy-Con. This is something you can do yourself or get a specialist store to do for you. And only around 6% of respondents said they're rocking these custom Joy-Cons, but it's a niche thing to do, but it's cool nonetheless that we have the option. Even more niche is the modding scene, as only around 3.5% of respondents said that they had modded, hacked, altered their Switch hardware in any way. No surprises here.
All right, and finally, it's a set of questions just to kind of close things out, looking ahead and what people kind of think about Nintendo's platform overall, what they want to see from it in the future, what games they think are still missing from the Switch, things like that, basically.
To start with, I wanted to know which Nintendo franchise folks were missing the most. I asked what single Nintendo property that's not yet on the Switch respondents would most like to see come to the machine. Now, despite the question specifying that announced games don't really count here, the number one response was for Metroid. Yes, we know Prime 4 is on the way at some point, and this response makes it clear that there's a real appetite for it. So how about you give us that trilogy in the meantime, Nintendo? In 2019 survey, Pikmin and F-Zero saw more responses than Metroid, so that Metroid delay is clearly playing on people's minds here. Anyway, the top 5 missing Nintendo games that folks want on the Switch are Metroid, Pikmin, F-Zero, Paper Mario, and Earthbound, or Mother. Other popular responses here included Star Fox, Kid Icarus, Golden Sun, Mario Strikers, Advance Wars, WarioWare, and Wii Sports. Or some sort of sports game, I guess. Next up, I asked what third-party franchise people would like to see come to the Switch, and just like last year, Persona and Kingdom Hearts are the series folks most want to see on the Switch. These two were the most popular responses yet again. Now, the Switch does have Persona 5 Scramble, but many noted in their responses that they wanted to see the main series come to Nintendo's machine. So, when I asked what third-party franchise folks want to see on the Switch, these were the top 5 answers. Persona, Kingdom Hearts, Halo, Grand Theft Auto, and Fallout. Other popular responses included games such as Banjo and Kazooie, Call of Duty, Borderlands, which is now coming, more Final Fantasy, how much do you want? Mass Effect, Metal Gear, Nier Automata, and Yakuza. A good number of folks also want to see Rare's Retro Collection Rare Replay come over to the Switch. That would be sweet, particularly for any older Nintendo fans. A fun question I like to ask is how likely folks would be willing to buy an updated Switch hardware revision, without knowing any details. Now, I know most people won't make a blind purchase, but I asked this as a way to kind of get a read on what level of customer loyalty Nintendo have built up for themselves during the Switch period. The answer here? Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, the average response landed at around 5.4. And take from that what you will, with it kind of being in the middle here, but as the chart shows, a good 15% are in the 10 column, saying that they would buy Nintendo's next hardware refresh without a doubt. I think this is a somewhat interesting read on how folks trust Nintendo to an extent. A new question I asked this year was around platform support. I asked how many years Switch owners expect Nintendo to continue to support the Switch platform, be that releasing games, updates, etc. Now, Switch owners would like Nintendo to continue to support the console for a further 6 years. This would take the device into 2026, making it around 9 years old. Now, this isn't an absurd ambition. A 10-year lifespan for a console isn't wholly unheard of. You just have to look at the PS2, for example. Just don't ask the Wii U. Now, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I imagine most people answering this don't expect Nintendo to have the very same hardware in 2026. There's going to be some sort of revision or update or pro model in the intervening years. Next, I asked a few gaming demographic questions about what was the very first Nintendo system that people owned. And as you can see here, the NES was top, but the Game Boy Advance came in second. I also asked what other systems people owned, beyond Nintendo. To little surprise, the PC came out on top, with 80% of respondents owning one. Around 50% of those who answered the survey own a PS4, with the Xbox One and Mac trailing at around 22% ownership. A few new options for this year were also added. As you can see, 11% said they own some form of VR system, and just 1% said they signed up for Google Stadia. I do wonder if I'll be able to include that as an option next year. Anyway, to close things, I asked how satisfied people are with the Nintendo Switch overall. On a scale of 1 to 5, the average answer comes out at 4.4. People love this little machine.
All right, so that is it. That is all of the questions and all of the answers for the State of Switch Survey 2020. Thank you so much for sticking with it. I know it's a long video, but thank you. Yeah. If you want to read it, it's over on my website at switchweekly.com. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And obviously, this takes a ton of time to put together each year. So if you appreciate what I'm doing here, I've also put links to my Ko-fi and my Patreon. And finally, I'll just plug my newsletter while I'm here, I guess. If you head over to switchweekly.com, it's an email newsletter I send out every Sunday to around 7,000 people. And it's all of the must-read Nintendo news from the past week, plus a list of all of the upcoming games that are going to hit the eShop in the next 7 days. So if you want to know what games are coming out, this is the place to do it. One email a week, no spam, no nonsense, nothing like that. It's just really straightforward. So yeah, thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one, I guess.